You're one step from being detained. Do you understand me? One step. Officer Alex Morgan grabbed Marlowe Denvers by the lapel of his dress white jacket, his fist tightening right over the row of medals, his knuckles pressed into the Navy Cross, the Silver Star, each one earned over 26 years of service and sacrifice. Then he twisted the fabric hard, as if the honors meant nothing. Marlowe didn't move or flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there in his brilliant white uniform, calm and unshaken as the tension pressed in around him. What Alex Morgan didn't know was that he was grabbing the lapel of a man whose phone contained the direct personal number of the highest-ranking officer in the United States Navy. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The mirror didn't lie. Marlowe Denvers had learned that a long time ago. Mirrors never did. They showed you exactly what was there. Nothing more, nothing less. And what was there, on this particular Tuesday morning, was a man in a hotel bathroom in Stafford, Virginia, putting on the most important thing he had ever worn. His navy dress whites. He started with the jacket. Always the jacket first. He lifted it from the hanger with both hands, the way you'd lift something sacred, and slid his arms into the sleeves slowly. The fabric was brilliant white, pressed the night before, not a single crease out of place. He had seen to that himself. He always did. Then came the medals. He lined them up on the bathroom counter before he pinned a single one. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart. 3 others that most people wouldn't recognize, but that every person who had ever served would understand immediately. He picked up each one carefully, placed it exactly where it belonged. His hands moved with the kind of precision that doesn't come from practice. It comes from years, from experience that leaves marks on a man, inside and out. Speaking of marks, his hands were scarred. Both of them. The right one had a long ridge of raised skin running from the base of his thumb to his wrist, a souvenir from a rope that had snapped during a descent in Afghanistan back in 2009. The left had 2 fingers that didn't bend all the way anymore, courtesy of a mountain pass and a firefight that had no business lasting as long as it did. His knuckles were thick. His palms were rough. These were not the hands of a man who had lived an easy life. But they were steady. They had always been steady. He checked his reflection one final time. The jacket sat perfectly. Every ribbon was aligned. The medals caught the bathroom light and held it. He stood straight, 6 feet and 2 inches of absolute stillness, and he looked himself in the eye, satisfied. "You look like a painting." He turned. His daughter Daisy was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame in her Sunday best. A deep navy dress, hair pinned up, eyes already soft with something she was trying not to show. She was 22 years old and brilliant, a pre-law student at Howard University, and she had her mother's face and his eyes. The combination had always struck him as the most remarkable thing he had ever had anything to do with. "Paintings don't move," he said. "They just endure." She smiled at that. Barely. But it was there. He put on his cover, his white officer's cap, and adjusted it with 2 fingers until it was exactly level. He took one last look at the mirror. The Navy Cross ceremony began in less than 2 hours. He had plenty of time. He was 51 minutes early. He was always early. Old habit. One that had saved his life more than once. They drove south on I-95 with the windows cracked and the radio off. The morning was already warm. One of those Virginia summer days that shows up without any warning and reminds you it means business. The sky was a wide, clean blue. American flags appeared along the roadside as they got closer, hanging from poles, stretched across storefronts, standing at attention in front of a VFW hall they passed just outside of town. Daisy watched the scenery move past her window. Marlowe kept his eyes on the road. Neither of them talked much. They didn't need to. That was something they had always shared, the ability to sit together without filling the space. Some people couldn't do that. Marlowe had always thought it said something important about a person. Whether they could handle quiet, whether they trusted it. He trusted it. The Stafford National Memorial appeared on the right. Wide iron gates set back from the road. A long paved path lined with headstones as far as the eye could see. White marble. Row after row after row. The kind of sight that put things in perspective, fast. Marlowe pulled into the parking lot and cut the engine. He stepped out into the heat. His dress whites caught the sunlight immediately. Bright and sharp, impossible to miss. Ahead of them, beyond the iron fence, the honor guard was already in position. White gloves, perfect posture. Flags waiting to move. Marlowe looked at the gate. He set his jaw. He walked forward. The access road was maybe 30 feet wide. A simple stretch of pavement running parallel to the memorial's iron fence, connecting the parking lot to the main entrance gate. Marlowe had walked roads like this 100 times. Short, flat, direct. He and Daisy crossed it side by side, moving toward the gate at an easy pace, the honor guard visible just beyond the fence ahead of them. That was when the voice came. "Hey!" Marlowe didn't stop. Not yet. Voices called out at events like this all the time. Logistics people, coordinators. It didn't necessarily mean him. "Hey, I'm talking to you." That one he couldn't ignore. He stopped and turned. 30 feet back, standing at the edge of the road near a mounted sign that read, "Authorized personnel only," was a police officer. White male. Mid-30s. Thick through the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been set in concrete. His uniform was Stafford PD, navy blue, badge catching the sun. His name tag read Morgan. He was not moving toward them. He was standing with his thumbs hooked in his belt, looking at Marlowe the way a man looks at something he's already decided is a problem. "Roads closed," Morgan said. "Get back on the sidewalk." Marlowe kept his voice level. "We're here for a ceremony. It starts in 40 minutes. I don't care what you're here for. This road is closed to foot traffic. Sidewalk's right there." Marlowe reached into the breast pocket of his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and produced his military identification card. He held it out. "Master Chief Marlowe Denvers, United States Navy, retired. I'm an honoree at this event." Morgan looked at the card the way you'd look at a receipt you didn't ask for. His eyes dropped to it for maybe 1 second, maybe less. Then he looked back up. "Step back," he said. "Both of you." Something shifted in the air around them. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But people nearby felt it. A couple walking toward the gate slowed down. 2 men in veterans' caps exchanged a glance. Daisy's hand tightened around the strap of her purse. Marlowe put the ID back in his pocket. He did not step back. "Sir," he said, "I am attending an official United States Navy ceremony on these grounds. My name is on the program. I'd ask you to let us through." Morgan took 3 steps forward, closing the distance, getting into the space that, in any other context, would make most people retreat. He was a man who understood the geometry of intimidation. He had used it before. He was using it now. "What I'm hearing," Morgan said, his voice dropping just enough to feel like a threat, "is a lot of words from somebody who doesn't know when to stop talking." "I know exactly when to stop talking," Marlowe said. "This isn't that moment." Morgan's jaw tightened. A muscle twitched below his left eye. He glanced down at Marlowe's chest, at the medals, the ribbons, the rows of decoration that represented a quarter-century of service, and something moved across his face. Not respect, not recognition. Something else entirely. Something that looked a lot like irritation. On a bench near the fence, half hidden by a cluster of people, a 73-year-old woman named Gwen Morrow sat very still. She was a retired schoolteacher from Richmond. She had driven 40 minutes to watch today's ceremony from outside the gates because she liked to honor veterans when she could. She had a cup of sweet tea in one hand. She put it down quietly, reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, raised it. She had seen this before. She knew what it looked like. She pressed record. Morgan stepped closer to Marlowe, close enough that there was almost no space left between them. His voice went flat and hard. "You want to keep playing this game? Fine. But I am telling you right now, you do not walk this road. Not until I say so. You got that?" Daisy stepped forward. "He showed you his ID." "I'm not talking to you," Morgan snapped, not even looking at her. Marlowe moved one step to the left, putting himself back between Morgan and his daughter. A quiet, automatic move, the kind a man makes without thinking about it. Morgan pointed, his finger aimed directly at Marlowe's chest. At the medals, at the ribbons, at every piece of hard-earned metal pinned to that brilliant white jacket. "I don't care what you've got pinned to you," he said. "You move when I tell you to move." The crowd had gone completely still. Nobody breathed. Then Morgan grabbed him, one hand, fist closing around the lapel of Marlowe's dress white jacket, just below the collar. Knuckles pressing against the Navy Cross, against the Silver Star, against 26 years of service that this man had decided, in this moment, meant absolutely nothing. Daisy made a sound, sharp, involuntary, like air leaving a punctured tire. Two people nearby raised their phones. Someone said, "Oh my God," in a low voice. The honor guard behind the gate had gone rigid. White-gloved hands at their sides, eyes forward, trained not to move. But their eyes moved. Every one of them. Marlowe did not move. He did not pull back. He did not raise his hands. He did not raise his voice. He stood exactly where he was and looked at Alex Morgan with an expression that was impossible to read and impossible to look away from. It was the face of a man who had been in rooms and valleys and corridors and burning buildings where the stakes were so much higher than this that this almost didn't register. Almost. "Take your hand," Marlowe said quietly. "Off my uniform." Morgan tightened his grip. The fabric pulled. A ribbon shifted a quarter-inch out of alignment. "You're one step from being detained. You understand me? One step." The crowd was a held breath. Nobody moved. Gwen Morrow's phone stayed up, steady as a rock, capturing every second. Marlowe looked at Morgan for a long moment. Then, slowly enough that Morgan could see every movement and choose to react, he reached into his breast pocket. Morgan's body tensed. His free hand dropped toward his belt. Marlowe produced a cell phone. Nothing else. Just a phone. He dialed a number from memory. 10 digits. No hesitation. He had called this number exactly 4 times in the last decade. He knew it the way he knew his own service number. 2 rings. "Fred." His voice was calm, conversational, almost. "It's Marlowe. I'm outside the gate. Your man out here has his hand on my jacket." He listened for 3 seconds. Then he lowered the phone from his ear and extended it toward Morgan. "He'd like to speak with you." Morgan stared at the phone. Something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe. The smug satisfaction of a man who thought he was about to watch someone embarrass themselves. He reached out with his free hand and took it. He put it to his ear, still holding Marlowe's lapel. "Yeah." His voice was flat, confident. The voice of a man who figured this was some relative, some friend trying to throw weight around. "This is Officer Morgan, Stafford PD. Who am I speaking with?" The voice on the other end answered. The color left Alex Morgan's face. Not gradually, all at once, like someone had opened a drain. Admiral Fred Jasmond, Chief of Naval Operations, 4 stars, the highest-ranking officer in the United States Navy. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried the absolute, unmistakable authority of a man who had commanded operations in 4 theaters of war and had never once needed to repeat himself. He told Morgan to release the Master Chief, right now, and to remain exactly where he was until further notice. That was all. Morgan's hand opened. The lapel fell free. He stood there holding the phone like it had turned into something he didn't recognize. Like he couldn't quite remember how he'd gotten it or what it was for. His mouth opened slightly, closed. He looked at Marlowe, then at the phone, then at Marlowe again. Marlowe reached out and took the phone back. "Thank you, Fred." He ended the call and slid the phone into his breast pocket. Then he reached up with 2 fingers and straightened the ribbon that Morgan had shifted out of alignment. He took his time with it. Got it exactly right. Then he looked at Morgan one final time. One single nod. Not triumphant. Not mocking. Just acknowledgement. The kind a man gives when a matter has been settled. He turned and walked through the gate. Behind him, someone began to clap. Then someone else. Then several people at once. Not a roar, but something genuine. Something that bubbled up because it couldn't be held down. Daisy caught up to him in 3 quick steps and grabbed his arm with both hands. She was shaking. He could feel it through his jacket sleeve. He was not shaking. He walked forward, steady as he had always been, into the grounds of the memorial, toward the ceremony, toward the moment that today had always been meant for. Lieutenant Commander Alina Majors was waiting just inside the checkpoint. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed and precise, the kind of person who arrived early to every room she ever entered. She wore her Navy service uniform, khaki and gold, with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every thread of it. She and Marlowe had served together for 3 years in the early 2000s. She knew him the way only people who have been through hard things together can know each other. She looked at him when he came through the gate, took in the set of his jaw, the steadiness of his walk, the barely visible tension behind his eyes. "You good?" she said. "I'm good," he said. She studied him for one more second. Then she pulled him into a firm embrace, the kind that said more than words could. She shook Daisy's hand warmly, told her she looked beautiful, and then guided them both down the stone path toward the ceremony pavilion. 200 people had gathered inside. The pavilion was open air, a wide stone platform framed by tall oak trees, surrounded on 3 sides by rows of white headstones that stretched back as far as the eye could see. Row after row after row. Men and women who had given everything. The kind of sight that rearranged something inside you if you let it. Marlowe let it. Chairs had been arranged in neat rows facing a low wooden stage. Active duty personnel sat in uniform on the left. Veterans, family members, and civilian guests filled the right side. At the front, beside the podium, a small table held a dark presentation box. Marlowe knew what was inside it. He took his seat in the front row beside Daisy. An officer handed him a printed program. He folded it in half without reading it and held it in his lap. Admiral Fred Jasmond took the podium at precisely 11 o'clock. He was 63 years old, white-haired, and built like a man who had never fully left the field. 4 stars on his shoulder boards, a chest full of his own decorations. He stood at the podium without notes. He had not prepared remarks. What he said next, he said from memory, because it was not the kind of thing a man forgot. He spoke about Ramadi, 2007. A collapsing building on a street that didn't appear on any map they'd been given. 6 men trapped on the 2nd floor. Smoke coming up through the floorboards. 30 seconds maybe less, before the whole structure came down. And one man who went back in. Jasmine didn't use military language. He didn't talk about tactical assessments or operational parameters. He said it plainly. Every one of us calculated the odds and made the same decision. We couldn't go back in. The math didn't work. He paused. Marlo Denvers looked at the same math and got a different answer. He went back in anyway, and he brought all 6 of them out. He let that sit for a moment. "I have given a lot of medals in my career," Jasmine said. "I want you to understand something about this one. This is not a medal for following orders. This is a medal for the kind of character that cannot be manufactured, cannot be trained, can only be revealed. In a moment when everything is on the line, and the choice is yours alone to make." He stepped away from the podium. Marlo stood. He walked to the stage with the same measured stride he had used all morning. Steady, unhurried. He stopped in front of Jasmine and stood at attention. Jasmine opened the presentation box. He lifted the Navy Cross, a dark blue cross on a white and blue ribbon, and pinned it to Marlo's chest, just above the row of decorations already there. He stepped back, saluted. Marlo returned it. In the front row, Daisy pressed 2 fingers to her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, silently. She did not look away. The reception afterward filled the memorial hall with warm noise, handshakes, quiet conversations. A table of food nobody was really eating. Marlo moved through the room, accepting every hand extended to him, answering every question with patience, posing for photographs with strangers who looked at him like he was something rare. He was standing near the far window, watching the honor guard outside begin to fold the flags, when he felt someone come up beside him. Majors. Her warm expression was gone. She spoke low. "Marlo, I need to show you something." Majors pulled him into a quiet corner near the back of the hall, away from the handshakes and the warm noise and the people still buzzing from the ceremony, away from all of it. She positioned herself with her back to the room. An old habit, the kind you develop when you don't want anyone reading your expression from across a space. Daisy had noticed them move. She crossed the room without being asked and stood beside her father. Majors looked at Marlo, then at Daisy, then back at Marlo. "Morgan filed a report," she said. "Already." The noise of the reception continued behind them like nothing had happened. Glasses clinking, low laughter, someone telling a story that ended with the whole table smiling. Marlo said nothing. He waited. 40 minutes, Majors said. "That's how long it took. While you were in there receiving the Navy Cross, he was outside writing it up. Somebody coached him. Had to have. The language is too clean, too fast." She reached into the pocket of her uniform jacket and produced her tablet. She pulled up the document and held it out. Marlo took it. He read slowly. The way he did everything, deliberately, completely, without skipping a single word. The report described a non-compliant civilian who had aggressively entered a restricted access road despite repeated lawful instructions to stop. It described verbal threats directed at a law enforcement officer. It used the phrase "threatening posture" twice. It described Morgan as having acted with restraint and professionalism under provocation. It did not mention the lapel. It did not mention the military ID. It did not mention the phone call. It was a work of careful, practiced fiction. Daisy read over his shoulder. He could feel the heat coming off her. "There's more," Majors said. She took the tablet back and pulled up a second document, an internal routing slip. Miller fast-tracked it. Morgan's supervisor. Normally, a report like this sits in the queue for a week minimum. This one escalated within the hour. "Why?" Daisy said. Majors glanced at her. "Miller's brother-in-law is running for the County Public Safety Review Board. The election's 6 weeks out. A case where an officer held the line against an aggressive civilian, even a veteran. That's useful. That's a campaign talking point. Marlowe handed the tablet back. His jaw was tight, not trembling, just set, like concrete that had been poured and had cured completely. "The video," he said. Majors nodded. "It went up online about 30 minutes ago. Someone in the crowd posted it." She paused. "Morgan's union rep was on the phone with the platform within 20 minutes. They flagged it as potentially doctored. It's been suppressed pending review. You can't find it if you search for it." Daisy made a sound that was not quite a word. She pressed her lips together and looked at the floor for exactly 1 second. Then she looked back up. Majors put the tablet away. She looked at Marlowe with the kind of expression that old teammates use when they have said everything useful and are simply standing with you now. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wanted today to be just today." "It was," Marlowe said. "It still is." He meant it. But there was something different in his voice now. Something that hadn't been there at the podium or at the gate. It wasn't anger exactly. It was recognition. The recognition of a man who has identified a threat, assessed it clearly, without panic, without denial, and is now deciding what to do about it. He reached up and touched the Navy Cross with 2 fingers, just briefly. Then he lowered his hand. Daisy was watching him. She had been watching him the way she always did when something serious was happening. Carefully, completely, the way you watch someone you are trying to learn from. "They're going to try to make you the story," she said. It wasn't a question. "They're going to try," Marlowe said. She looked at him for a long moment. Her chin came up slightly. Her voice was steady and quiet, and absolutely certain. "Daddy, we fight this." He looked at his daughter, 22 years old, sharp as a blade, standing in the corner of a reception hall in her Sunday best, with fire behind her eyes and not 1 ounce of retreat in her posture. He looked down at the Navy Cross one more time. "Yes," he said. He said it the same way he said everything that mattered, without drama, without hesitation. "We do." They left the reception together, side by side, walking back out through the same gate he had walked through that morning. The honor guard was gone now. The flags had been folded. The memorial grounds were quiet in the afternoon heat. They had a long road ahead. Marlowe had never once been afraid of a long road. They drove back to Richmond that evening in the same quiet they had driven down in. But it was a different kind of quiet now. The morning's quiet had been calm, settled, the quiet of a man at peace with where he was going. This one had edges to it. This one had weight. Marlowe drove. Daisy sat in the passenger seat with her phone in her lap, scrolling through legal databases, making notes in a small notebook she kept in her purse. She didn't stop the whole way home. He didn't ask her to. By 9 o'clock the next morning, they were sitting across a conference table from Ruby Beckford. Her office was on the 4th floor of a building in downtown Richmond. Clean, organized, not fancy. The kind of office that belonged to someone who spent their money on preparation rather than appearances. Ruby herself looked exactly like that. Early 60s. Natural silver hair cut close. Reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, and she had the kind of stillness that came from having sat across from very powerful people for a very long time, and having never once blinked first. She read Morgan's incident report without a word, all the way through. Then she set it down flat on the table and looked at Marlowe. "He's done this before," she said. "How many times?" Marlowe said. "That I can document?" 3. She opened a folder and slid 3 separate incident summaries across the table. 3 prior complaints, all involving black men, all filed with nearly identical language: non-compliant, aggressive, threatening. You could practically copy and paste. She tapped the folder. Not one resulted in formal discipline. 2 were settled quietly before any hearing. 1 was dropped when the complainant stopped returning calls. Daisy leaned forward. How does that happen? Ruby looked at her over the top of her glasses. It happens because of the machine, she said. And I want you both to understand exactly how it works, because a lot of people go into this fight without understanding it, and they lose before they get started. She folded her hands on the table. Morgan files his report. The union assigns a rep within the hour, which has already happened. The rep's job is one thing: protect the officer. They don't investigate. They construct. They take the report, clean up the language, and build a counter-narrative before you've even had time to process what happened to you. She paused. Then your complaint enters the formal pipeline: internal affairs, review boards, departmental hearings, all of which operate on their own timeline, months, sometimes longer. And while all of that is grinding along, the political moment passes. The public moves on. The pressure drops. And then, very quietly, Morgan gets reassigned to a different sector, and the whole thing just disappears. The room was quiet. That's how it always works, Ruby said. Every single time. Marlowe sat with that for a moment. Then he said, Tell me about the other men. Ruby's expression shifted slightly. Something moved behind her eyes. She reached back into the folder. There's one I want you to know about specifically, she said. His name is Anton Hilson, 67 years old, retired postal worker, 32 years of service with the USPS. Never missed a day, never had a disciplinary note in his file. 2 years ago, Morgan stopped him outside a pharmacy on Garrison Road. She paused. Hilson ended up in the hospital. 2 cracked ribs. Morgan's report said he fell while resisting. And the hospital records? Daisy said. Don't match the police report, Ruby said flatly. Not even close. Did he press charges? Marlowe asked. He was going to. Then someone had a quiet word with him. Told him that pursuing it could complicate his pension review. Nothing written down. Nothing provable. Just a conversation. She closed the folder. He backed down. He's been living with it ever since. Marlowe was still. His eyes had not moved from Ruby's face. Where is he now? He said. Ruby looked at him carefully, like she was measuring something. Richmond, she said. About 4 miles from here. Marlowe pushed back his chair and stood up. He picked up his jacket from the back of the seat and put it on. He looked at Daisy. I'll be back by dinner, he said. Ruby watched him walk to the door. She had represented a lot of clients in her career. She had sat across from a lot of people in a lot of trouble. She had learned, over 30 years, to read a man by the way he moved when the stakes were real. Marlowe Denvers moved like a man who had already decided. The neighborhood was quiet in the early afternoon. Small houses set back from the street behind modest lawns. Old oak trees throwing shade across the sidewalk. The kind of block where people had lived for 30 years and knew each other's cars. Marlowe parked at the curb and sat for a moment with the engine off, looking at the brick house at the end of the short driveway. A wind chime moved on the front porch. A pair of reading glasses sat on a small table beside the door. He got out and walked up. He knocked. Footsteps inside. Then silence. The particular silence of someone looking through a peephole, deciding. The door opened 4 inches, stopped by a chain, and a woman looked out at him. Small. 60s. Eyes sharp with suspicion and something older than suspicion. Something that had been earned over a lifetime of answering doors and not always knowing what was on the other side. Can I help you? She said. Her voice said she wasn't sure she wanted to. My name is Marlowe Denvers, he said. I'm looking for Anton Hilson. I'm not law enforcement. I'm not a reporter. I'm a veteran, retired Navy. and I have something I need to talk to Mr. Hilson about. It concerns Alex Morgan." The name landed. He watched it land. The woman's eyes changed. The sharp suspicion didn't leave. It just moved aside to make room for something else. Recognition. And behind that, the particular kind of wariness that comes from a wound that never fully healed. The door closed. The chain rattled. The door opened all the way. "Come in," she said. Anton Hilson was in the living room. He sat in a recliner near the window, with a cane leaning against the armrest. A dark wood cane with a rubber tip, worn smooth from use. He was smaller than Marlowe had imagined. Not frail exactly, but reduced. Like a man who had been a certain size for most of his life, and had lost some of it somewhere along the way. His hair was white at the temples, and his hands, resting on the armrests, were the hands of a man who had worked hard for a long time. He looked at Marlowe, the way men of a certain age and experience look at strangers who show up with serious faces. Measuring. Waiting. "Sit down," he said. His voice was steady. Quiet. Whatever he had lost in size, he had kept in composure. Marlowe sat on the couch across from him. Hilson's wife, she had introduced herself as Eva, stood in the doorway to the kitchen with her arms crossed. She was not leaving. Marlowe didn't blame her. "You said Alex Morgan," Hilson said. "Yes, sir." "What about him?" "I had an encounter with him yesterday," Marlowe said. "Outside a ceremony at the Stafford National Memorial. He put his hand on my uniform. Filed a false report afterward. The department is backing him up." He paused. "Ruby Beckford is my attorney. She told me what happened to you 2 years ago. I came to hear it from you directly." Hilson looked at him for a long moment. The wind chime on the porch made a soft sound through the screen door. Eva hadn't moved. Then Hilson started talking. He had been outside the pharmacy on Garrison Road on a Tuesday afternoon, picking up his blood pressure medication. He was walking back to his car when Morgan pulled up beside him and told him to stop. No explanation. Just stop. When Hilson asked why, Morgan got out of the car. When Hilson asked a second time, things escalated fast. He ended up on the pavement. He wasn't sure exactly how it happened. It was fast, and then it was over, and he was looking up at the sky with something wrong in his side. He woke up in the hospital the next morning with 2 cracked ribs and a story that didn't match the police report in a single meaningful detail. His voice broke once. When he described calling Eva from the hospital room. When he described the way she sounded when she picked up. He stopped talking for a moment and looked out the window at the oak tree in his front yard. Eva looked at her shoes. Marlowe waited. He didn't fill the silence. He let the man have it. When Hilson looked back, something in his face had shifted. Harder, clearer. 2 years, he said. I've been carrying this thing for 2 years, because some man told me, quietly, nicely, that talking about it might cause problems with my pension. So I stayed quiet. He exhaled slowly through his nose. I stayed quiet, and it hasn't done me a bit of good. Marlowe leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. His voice was low and direct. I'm not staying quiet, he said. And I could use a witness who isn't. Hilson studied him. The way you study a road before you decide to walk it. You that man? He said. Are you actually that man? Marlowe held his gaze without blinking. I am, he said. Hilson's hand moved across the armrest and extended toward him. Marlowe reached out and took it. They shook once. Firm, brief, the kind of handshake that means something. Eva uncrossed her arms in the kitchen doorway. Outside, the wind chime moved again in the afternoon breeze. 2 days passed. Marlowe spent them the way he spent most hard stretches, methodically. He called Ruby every morning. He reviewed documents in the evening. He slept when he could, and didn't waste energy on the hours when he couldn't. He had learned a long time ago that anger without direction was just fuel without an engine. It didn't take you anywhere. It just burned. On the third morning after the visit with Hilson, he drove to Daisy's apartment in Church Hill. She had a small place on the second floor of a converted row house. Bookshelves on every wall, case law binders stacked on the kitchen counter, a corkboard above her desk covered in color-coded notes. She had set up her laptop on the coffee table and pulled up the local news stream. She handed him a cup of coffee without a word. They sat on the couch together and watched. The segment ran 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Marlowe counted. The anchor introduced it carefully. A dispute between a local law enforcement officer and a decorated Navy veteran at a Stafford memorial ceremony has sparked conversation this week. Conversation. That was the word they chose. The footage from Gwen Morrow's video played for exactly 9 seconds before cutting to a split screen. Morgan's union representative on the left, a news desk commentator on the right. The union rep was smooth. Mid-50s, well-dressed, the kind of man who had done this exact thing many times before and had stopped feeling anything about it. He called the video incomplete and taken out of context. He said Officer Morgan had been following standard perimeter protocol and had shown considerable restraint throughout the encounter. He said the union stood fully behind its officer and that any characterization of misconduct was premature and irresponsible. Then the segment cut to a recorded statement from Sergeant Theo Miller. He stood outside the Stafford PD building in his full uniform, reading from a prepared card. The department stood behind Officer Morgan. Standard protocol had been followed. The matter was under internal review. He did not say Marlowe's name. Not once. He didn't need to. The framing had already done that work. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Veteran and officer in dispute at memorial event." Dispute. Like it was a disagreement between neighbors about a fence line. Daisy closed the laptop. She sat back and pressed her hands flat against her thighs, the way she did when she was controlling something. "They're making it equal," she said. "Like there are two reasonable sides." "That's the strategy," Marlowe said. "Make it complicated. Once it's complicated, people stop being certain. Once they stop being certain, the moment passes." Daisy picked up her phone and drafted a post. A clear, factual account of what had happened at the gate, with a link to the partially restored Morrow video. She hit publish. By that afternoon, it had 200 engagements. A handful of shares. Nothing that broke through. The algorithm had no interest in small fires. That same morning, Ruby filed the formal civil rights complaint with the Stafford PD Internal Affairs Division. She called Marlowe to tell him it was submitted. She also told him something else. The investigator assigned to the complaint was a 17-year department veteran named Grady Sessions. He and Morgan had worked the same patrol sector for 6 of those years. They had been photographed together at the department's annual banquet 3 times. It was all public record, all findable. Ruby had found it in 40 minutes. For 2 days, nothing came back. Then the city council office called Ruby's office with an invitation. Would Marlowe Denvers be willing to speak at the next open public session? Ruby called Marlowe immediately. She said it cautiously. It could be a genuine opening. A chance to put his account on public record in a formal civic setting. Marlowe said yes. 22 hours later, the council office called back. The invitation was withdrawn. Pending review. They were sorry for any confusion. Ruby called that evening while Marlowe was eating dinner alone at his kitchen table. She didn't waste time. "The complaint is stalled," she said. "Sessions hasn't moved it an inch. I expected this, but I wanted you to hear it from me directly." She paused. "We need pressure from outside the system entirely. Someone whose name carries federal weight." Another pause. "Would Admiral Jasmine make a public statement?" Marlowe set down his fork. He stared at the wall across from him for a moment. Then he said, "I'll call him in the morning." He picked his fork back up. He finished his dinner. He washed the dish and put it away. Then he went to his study, sat down, and started writing out everything he needed to say. He called at 7 in the morning, not because he thought Jasmine would be asleep. The man had been waking up at 5 a.m. since 1983 and had never once broken the habit. Marlowe called at 7 because it felt like the right hour for a hard conversation. Early enough to be serious, late enough to be respectful. The line rang twice. "Marlowe." Jasmine's voice was the same as always. Low, measured, the kind of voice that had learned over decades to carry authority without volume. "I've been expecting your call." "Then you've seen the news coverage," Marlowe said. "I have." "And the report Morgan filed." "That too." A brief pause. "Alina Majors forwarded it to me through proper channels. I've read every word." His voice tightened almost imperceptibly on the last two words. "Almost." "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," Marlowe said, because he was. "I'm calling to give you professional courtesy. My attorney is pushing this forward. It's going to escalate. Your name is going to come up in coverage. Probably soon. I wanted you to hear that from me before you heard it somewhere else." "I appreciate that," Jasmine said. Then he stopped talking. The silence stretched out. Marlowe knew silences. He had spent a career reading them, in mission briefings, in debriefs, in the particular quiet that fell over a room when a commanding officer was about to say something nobody wanted to hear. This one had a shape to it, a weight. "Fred," Marlowe said. Jasmine exhaled, long and slow. "Marlowe, I have been advised by legal counsel, Navy counsel, not to engage publicly with this matter at this time." The words came out carefully, like they had been chosen and recited and chosen again. "The service has appropriations hearings in front of the House Armed Services Committee in 6 weeks," Jasmine continued. "There are people on both sides of that committee who would use my involvement in a local law enforcement controversy to make those hearings about something other than the Navy's operational needs. I have been strongly encouraged to maintain a public distance from the situation until the formal process plays out." Marlowe said nothing. "I'm sorry," Jasmine said, and he meant it. The word carried real weight, the weight of a man who understood exactly what he was saying and didn't feel clean about it. "I understand," Marlowe said. "Marlowe." "Fred, I understand. I mean that." He kept his voice even, neutral. "Thank you for being straight with me." He ended the call. He put the phone face down on his desk and sat with his hands flat on the wood surface on either side of it. The study was quiet. Morning light came through the single window at an angle, cutting across the floor in a long, pale stripe. Somewhere outside, a car started and drove away. Marlowe sat very still and thought about what he now understood. It wasn't just Morgan. It was never just Morgan. Morgan was one man, small, in the grand scheme of things, replaceable. The kind of man the system produced reliably and protected automatically because the system needed men like him to function the way it wanted to function. What Marlowe was actually fighting was the entire structure that surrounded that one man. The union, the department, the political machinery attached to the department. The media dynamic that flattened the story into two equal sides. The internal complaint process with its assigned investigator who had lunch with the subject of the complaint. And now, even the institution that Marlowe had given 26 years of his life to was keeping its distance, protecting its budget, protecting its position. He had known this, intellectually, since Ruby had laid it out at her conference table. But knowing something intellectually, and sitting alone in a quiet room feeling the full weight of it, were two different things. He got up. He walked to the garage. He went inside and sat on the workbench in the dark with his hands on his knees for 20 minutes. Not spiraling, not collapsing, just letting himself feel the size of the thing he was up against. You didn't fight something this big by pretending it was small. You fought it by seeing it clearly and deciding to move anyway. He got up. He went back inside. Daisy was at the kitchen table with her laptop open, surrounded by printed pages and highlighted notes. She had let herself in with her key. She looked up when he came in. Something in his face told her everything. She reached over and turned her laptop toward him. "Sit down, Daddy," she said quietly. "Tell me what he said. Then I want to show you what I've been working on." He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "Tell me what you found," he said. The video broke through on a Thursday. Not the clipped 9-second version the local news had used. The full 4 minutes and 11 seconds of Gwen Morrow's unedited recording. Steady, clear, capturing every word and every second from the moment Morgan called out across the access road to the moment Marlowe walked through the gate. It surfaced on a national veterans advocacy platform called Standing Watch, and within 3 hours, a retired Marine general with 800,000 followers had shared it with 4 words. "This is what they do." By that evening, it had 2 million views. By the next morning, it had 4. The national press arrived like weather. Suddenly, everyone had Marlo Denvers's name in their mouths. His service record went public. 26 years, 3 combat tours, the Navy Cross, pinned 8 days ago at the very ceremony Morgan had tried to keep him from. The story assembled itself and spread faster than anyone could shape it. Marlowe's phone rang so many times, he turned it face down and let Ruby handle the press inquiries. She called him at noon, and for the first time since this began, her voice had something lighter in it. "The city attorney's office just called," she said. "They want to discuss a resolution." Marlowe sat up straighter. "What kind of resolution?" "Formal departmental apology. Morgan suspended with pay pending investigation. The false incident report expunged from the record." She paused. "It's not everything, but it's a crack in the wall, Marlowe. That office does not call unless they're feeling real pressure." That evening, Marlowe drove to Ruby's office. Daisy was already there when he arrived, sitting across the conference table with her notebook open. Ruby had ordered food, containers of rice and chicken stacked in the center of the table, and for one evening, the 3 of them sat together and let themselves feel something that had been in short supply for the past 2 weeks. Relief. Actual, genuine relief. They talked through the terms. They talked through what an apology from the department would mean. Not just for Marlowe, but for the formal record, for any future cases, for the paper trail that Ruby was building with the meticulous patience of someone constructing a foundation rather than just winning an argument. Daisy asked sharp questions. Ruby answered every one of them directly. By 9 o'clock, when Marlowe drove home, the weight in his chest had loosened by several degrees. He pressed the dress whites that night out of habit, hung them back in the garment bag. He slept. The story ran the next morning. He saw it on his phone at 6:47 a.m. before he was fully awake. A regional outlet, the kind of publication that existed primarily to service a particular point of view. The headline sat on the screen like something thrown at him. "Navy Cross recipient has violent past. Records reveal decorated veterans' history of aggression." He sat up. He read it. At age 23, before he ever enlisted, Marlowe had been involved in a bar fight, a single incident, a misdemeanor charge that had been fully expunged from his record decades ago. It was gone. Legally, officially, completely gone. Because that was what expungement meant. It meant it did not exist. Except that now it did. Because someone had found it. Someone with access to sealed records had reached in and pulled it out and handed it to a reporter. By mid-morning, the viral video was being argued about rather than watched. Comment sections filled with people who had never served a day in their lives, debating whether a man with a 28-year-old misdemeanor could really be trusted. Morgan's union held a press conference at noon. The representative was practiced and calm and said that Morgan had filed his report in good faith, that the video did not represent the full context of the exchange, and that the rush to judgment against a dedicated law enforcement officer was itself a form of injustice. The city attorney's office called Ruby at 2 p.m. The resolution conversation was on hold. Marlowe was sitting at his kitchen table reading the union statement when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Anton Hilson. He answered. Hilson's voice was low and tired, older sounding than it had been at the kitchen table in Richmond. "Marlowe," he said, "I got to tell you something, and I need you to understand. I am sorry." Marlowe went still. "Somebody from the police union called my daughter's employer yesterday," Hilson said. "Her school. Just asking questions, they said. Real polite. But she called me last night, and she was scared, son. She was scared." His voice cracked at the edges. "I can't be your witness. I can't do that to her." The kitchen was completely silent. "I understand," Marlowe said. "Anton, I understand." He ended the call. He set the phone on the table. Daisy was across from him. She had been there all morning. She watched her father's face and saw something she had never seen there before. Just for a moment. Just a flicker. She pulled her laptop closer. Her voice was very quiet. "Daddy," she said, "they broke the law." Marlowe looked at his daughter across the kitchen table. She had her laptop open and a stack of printed pages beside it. Highlighted, tabbed, annotated in the tight, precise handwriting she had inherited from nobody in particular and developed entirely on her own. She had been building toward this moment for days. He could see it now. The careful, methodical way she turned the laptop to face him told him everything about how long she had been waiting for the right moment to say what she was about to say. "A sealed expungement record," she said, "cannot be accessed by law enforcement for the purpose of public disclosure. Not in Virginia. Not anywhere in this country." She pushed a printed page across the table toward him. Virginia Code 19.2. 392.4. Unauthorized disclosure of expunged records. It's not a policy violation, Daddy. It's not a department rule somebody bent. It is a criminal statute. Whoever pulled your record and handed it to that reporter committed a crime. Marlowe looked at the page. He read it. All of it. Then he read it again. "Who has access to sealed records through law enforcement databases?" he said. "Certified officers. Through a restricted state portal." She pulled up another tab. "Every access is logged. Every single one. The system records who opened it, when, and from which terminal. That log is not sealed. That log is discoverable." She sat back. They didn't just overreach. They left a trail. The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Marlowe had spent 26 years in environments where the difference between a good plan and a catastrophic one came down to one thing: whether the other side had made a mistake you could use. He had learned to spot those mistakes quickly, to assess them without emotion, to understand exactly what they meant and exactly what they made possible. This was a mistake, a significant one. He picked up his phone and called Ruby. She answered on the second ring. It was past 8 in the evening, and she answered like she had been sitting next to the phone. "Daisy found something," Marlowe said. "Tell me." He put the phone on speaker and set it on the table between them. Daisy leaned forward and walked Ruby through it. The statute, the access logs, the chain of custody that the leak had created. Her voice was clear and organized. She cited the code section from memory before she even looked at the page. When Daisy finished, Ruby was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been working on this?" "Since the story ran," Daisy said. 2 days. Another pause. Longer this time. "I need to tell you both something," Ruby said. Her voice had shifted. Not louder, just more direct. The way a person sounds when they are done being careful with information. "I have been in contact with the Virginia Attorney General's office for the past 48 hours. Quietly. Preliminary conversations. Nothing formal yet." She paused. "I was waiting. I needed the other side to do exactly what they just did. I needed a provable crime on the record before I moved. Because without it, we had a civil complaint and a viral video. With it, we have a criminal investigation attached to a civil rights lawsuit. That changes everything about how much pressure this system is about to feel." Marlowe looked at the phone. "You were waiting for them to overreach." "They always do," Ruby said simply. "People who have never faced real consequences believe they never will. That belief makes them sloppy." A brief pause. "I'll be on the phone with the AG's office first thing tomorrow morning. I'm going to need Daisy's research. All of it. Formatted and sourced." "It'll be in your inbox by midnight," Daisy said. "Good." Then Ruby said something she didn't say often. Something that wasn't part of her professional vocabulary. "Daisy, you would have made an excellent investigator." Daisy looked at her father across the table. Something moved across her face. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter and more certain than pride. "I'm going to be a better lawyer," she said. Marlowe looked at his daughter, 22 years old. 2 days of independent legal research spread across a kitchen table. A criminal statute cited from memory. A case that had been stalling for 2 weeks, suddenly cracked open by a young woman who had decided the situation required more than outrage. It required work. He felt the last trace of what had flickered across his face after Hilson's call. That brief, unwelcome shadow. Dissolve completely. It was gone. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers for just a moment. Then he stood up, picked up his coffee cup, rinsed it in the sink. "I'll let you work," he said. She was already typing. Ruby called at 7 the next morning. Marlowe was already up. Coffee made, sitting at the kitchen table with the printed Virginia statute in front of him, reading it for the 4th time. Not because he didn't understand it. Because understanding something completely and understanding something legally were 2 different things, and he wanted to know every word before the day started moving. "I've been on the phone since 6, Ruby said. "The AG's office is interested, very interested. They're not making any formal announcements yet. They want to review Daisy's documentation first, but the language from their side has shifted. This is no longer a preliminary conversation." "How long before they move?" Marlowe said. "Days, not weeks." She paused. "There's something else. The Veterans Advocacy Group, Standing Watch, the platform that shared Morrow's video, they've retained an independent investigative team. Retired JAG officers and 2 journalists who specialize in law enforcement accountability. They've been running public records requests across 3 jurisdictions for the past 48 hours. Marlowe set down his coffee. "What did they find?" Ruby took a breath. The kind of breath that precedes something significant. "Morgan wasn't born in Stafford," she said. "He was transferred there in 2019. He came from Hargrove County, smaller department, about 40 minutes west. While he was there, an excessive force complaint was filed against him. A young man, 24 years old. The complaint was serious enough that it should have gone to a formal hearing." She paused. It never did. Instead, the county settled quietly, paid the complainant, sealed the agreement, and offered Morgan a voluntary transfer in exchange for his resignation. Stafford PD hired him 6 weeks later. The kitchen was completely still. "They knew," Marlowe said. "They had reason to know," Ruby said carefully. "Whether they conducted a thorough background inquiry or chose not to look too hard, that's something a federal lawsuit will establish. But the paper trail exists. The transfer timeline exists. The gap between his Hargrove resignation and his Stafford hire is 6 weeks. That's not a coincidence. That's a transaction. Marlowe stood up from the table and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet. A neighbor's sprinkler moved in slow arcs across a front lawn. Ordinary, peaceful. The kind of morning that had no idea what was being said in kitchens like this one. "This isn't one bad officer," Marlowe said. "No," Ruby said. "It never was. Morgan is the symptom. The department is the disease. And now we have documentation of both." She let that sit for a moment. "I'm filing the federal civil rights lawsuit today, this afternoon. 42 U.S.C., Section 1983, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. Named defendants are Morgan, Miller, and the city of Stafford." Marlowe turned from the window. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to be present at the filing," she said. "On the courthouse steps, in your dress whites." He didn't hesitate. "What time?" 2 o'clock. Richmond Federal Courthouse. "I'll be there." "Marlowe." Her voice changed slightly, became more direct in a way that meant she was about to say something she had weighed carefully before saying. "What we're doing today is not just about you. You understand that. The Hilson case, the Hargrove transfer, the sealed record leak. We are building a case that establishes a pattern. A documented, provable pattern of misconduct enabled by institutional indifference. That is how you don't just win. That is how you make it harder for this to happen to the next man." Marlowe was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. After he hung up, he went to the bedroom closet. He moved aside 2 hanging garment bags until he found the right one. He unzipped it slowly. The dress whites were exactly as he had left them, every fold deliberate, the fabric still brilliant white, the empty space above the breast pocket where the Navy Cross now hung on its presentation box in his study. He lifted the jacket out carefully, checked every seam, every crease. He carried it to the bathroom and hung it on the back of the door where the steam from the shower would release any remaining stiffness from the fabric. Then he went to his study and opened the presentation box. He lifted the Navy Cross and held it in both hands for a moment. The dark blue cross. The white and blue ribbon. The weight of it. Not heavy in ounces, but heavy in everything else. He was going to wear it today. Not for a ceremony. For something more important. He called Daisy. She answered before the first ring finished. "Clear your afternoon," he said. "It's time." He was putting on his dress whites when his phone rang. He had the jacket laid out on the bed, the Navy Cross sitting in its open box on the nightstand beside it. He was moving with the same careful precision he always brought to this, each step deliberate, nothing rushed, when the phone lit up on the dresser. He looked at the screen. Admiral Fred Jasmond. Marlowe picked it up. Fred. Marlowe. A pause, brief. Like the man on the other end was making a final decision about something he had already mostly decided. "I want to talk to you before today." "I'm listening." "I retained personal legal counsel yesterday morning," Jasmine said. "Private attorney. No Navy involvement, no institutional connection. Entirely separate from my role and my uniform." His voice was steady and unhurried. The voice Marlowe remembered from a dozen briefings in a dozen difficult places. "I submitted a voluntary sworn statement to the Virginia Attorney General's office this morning. Written and signed. It details what I heard during that phone call outside the Memorial Gate. Morgan's tone, his words, the physical contact with your uniform, my direct order, and his response to it." He paused. "Every word of it is on record now." Marlowe sat down on the edge of the bed. "Fred, I'm not finished." Not harsh, just direct. "I also made some calls this week. Quiet ones. The congressional liaison to the House Armed Services Committee is now aware that a Navy Cross recipient was physically accosted at a federal memorial event by local law enforcement, who subsequently filed a false report characterizing him as the aggressor. A brief silence. I did not make that call officially. I made it as a man who has served this country for 40 years and knows which things cannot be allowed to simply disappear. Marlowe didn't speak for a moment. Outside his bedroom window, a car passed slowly on the street below. The ordinary world moving at its ordinary pace, completely unaware of the conversation happening inside this room. Your counsel advised you against all of this, Marlowe said. They did, Jasmine said. Strongly. Repeatedly. He didn't sound bothered by that. I told them I didn't want to be protected from this one. The appropriations hearing will happen with or without my involvement in this situation, Jasmine said. And if there are members of that committee who want to use my defense of a decorated SEAL against the Navy's budget, then I would genuinely like to watch them try. Something moved in his voice then. Not anger, something older and quieter than anger. Conviction. The kind that had been sitting somewhere for a while, waiting for the right moment to stand up. Marlowe, I have given a lot of orders in my career. Some of them I'm proud of. Some of them I made peace with a long time ago. But I have never once given an order I was more certain about than the one I gave you 23 years ago in Ramadi. I told you to stand down. I told you the math didn't work. A pause. You didn't listen. And 6 men came home because you didn't. Marlowe looked at the Navy Cross in its open box on the nightstand. I told my counsel something else, Jasmine continued. I told them that a man once went into a burning building for 6 of my people when every reasonable calculation said not to. The least I can do is pick up a phone and tell the truth about what I heard. Another pause. Shorter this time. That's not sacrifice, Marlowe. That's the absolute minimum. The room was quiet. Between 2 men who had served together, who had shared the particular silence of people who had been through things that most people would never understand, this silence was different from all the others. It was not uncomfortable. It was not heavy. It was the silence of something that had needed to be said, finally being said. And both men knew it. Thank you, Fred, Marlowe said. Don't thank me, Jasmine said simply. Just win. Marlowe almost smiled at that. Yes, sir. See you on the other side of this. You will. He ended the call. He set the phone on the dresser and stood in the quiet of the room for a moment. Then he turned back to the bed, picked up his dress white jacket, and put it on. Sleeve by sleeve. He straightened the collar. He picked up the Navy Cross from its box and pinned it to his chest. Exactly where it belonged. Exactly level. Exactly right. He picked up the garment bag. He walked out the door. The news broke at 9:17 in the morning. Marlowe was in Ruby's conference room when her phone lit up with the alert. She read it, set the phone face down on the table, and looked at him with the composed expression of someone who had expected this, but was still allowing herself one quiet moment of satisfaction. The AG's office has opened a formal criminal investigation, she said. Unlawful disclosure of sealed criminal records. It's official. She slid her laptop across the table. The press release was already on the screen. 2 paragraphs, tight and formal. The kind of language that government offices used when they wanted to say something serious without saying anything extra. It didn't need to say anything extra. The words criminal investigation carried everything. Within the hour, the database access logs had done exactly what Daisy said they would do. They told the truth. Every access was recorded, time-stamped, terminal identified, officer badged. The log showed one name accessing Marlowe Denvers's sealed expungement record 2 days before the story ran. One name on one terminal at one specific time. Sergeant Theo Miller. Ruby got the call at 10:45. Miller had been placed on administrative leave pending criminal charges. She wrote the name on her legal pad, circled it once, and set down her pen. At 11:30, the Stafford chief of police held a press conference. Marlo and Daisy watched it on Ruby's laptop in the conference room. The chief stood outside the department building in his full uniform, a man who had said nothing for 2 weeks, and now had no choice but to say something. He read from a prepared statement. His voice was flat. His eyes moved between the paper and a point somewhere above the assembled cameras that was definitely not any individual human face. Officer Alex Morgan had been suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a full internal affairs investigation. The department was cooperating fully with the Virginia Attorney General's criminal inquiry. The department remained committed to the highest standards of professional conduct. He did not apologize. He did not say Marlo's name. He took no questions. When it ended, Ruby closed the laptop. "Not enough," Daisy said. "No," Ruby agreed, "which is exactly why we're filing this afternoon." The Richmond Federal Courthouse sat on Broad Street like it had been placed there specifically to make a point about permanence. Wide stone steps, tall columns, the kind of building that had seen 100 years of people climbing those steps with something urgent in their hands and something heavier in their chests. Marlo climbed them at 1:55 p.m. in his full-dress whites. Every medal, every ribbon. The Navy Cross centered on his chest, catching the afternoon sun. He walked with the same stride he always walked with. Measured, unhurried, completely certain of each step. Ruby was beside him in a charcoal suit, her briefcase in one hand, the federal filing in the other. Daisy walked on his left in her navy dress, her chin up, her eyes straight ahead. Cameras were already assembled at the bottom of the steps. Word had moved fast. Ruby stopped at the top of the steps and faced the press. She read the core of the filing in a clear, carrying voice. 42 United States Code, Section 1983. Deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Named defendants: Officer Alex Morgan, Sergeant Theo Miller, the City of Stafford. The lawsuit detailed the access road confrontation, the false incident report, the suppression of video evidence, the criminal leak of a sealed record, and the department's documented history of enabling Morgan's conduct by hiring him despite prior complaints and then protecting him against every subsequent one. When she finished, the questions came fast. She answered 3. Then she stepped back. Marlo did not speak to the press. He did not need to. He stood at the top of those courthouse steps in his dress whites, and he was still, the way he was always still. And that stillness said everything that needed saying. It said, "I am not going anywhere." It said, "I was not wrong." It said, "I have been standing on harder ground than this for a very long time." Someone in the gathered crowd began to clap. Gwen Morrow's interview ran on a national morning program the following day. She sat in a studio chair in her good blue blouse, composed and clear-eyed, and told the host exactly what she had seen and exactly why she had raised her phone. "I knew what I was seeing," she said. "I've been knowing what this looks like my whole life. I just finally had something in my hand to prove it." That evening Marlo's phone rang. Anton Hilson. His voice was different. Not tired this time, resolute. "I saw the photograph," Hilson said quietly. "Your daughter told me to call." Marlo said, "Take your time." Hilson said, "I've taken enough time already." The sentencing happened 6 weeks later on a Wednesday morning in a Stafford County courtroom. Marlo sat in the third row. Ruby was beside him, Daisy on his left. Anton Hilson sat 2 seats down, his cane resting against his knee, his back straight, his eyes forward. Eva held his hand. The courtroom was full, standing room only. Morgan was brought in first. He wore a gray suit that no longer fit him quite right. like a man who had lost something in the months since the arrest, something beyond weight. He did not look at the gallery. He looked at the floor, the table, his attorney's sleeve. Anywhere that wasn't a face. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses, and the patient, immovable authority of someone who had presided over 30 years of people attempting to avoid accountability, reviewed the sentencing memorandum without hurry. The federal civil rights conviction. The documented pattern of misconduct across 2 departments. The Hargrove County complaint. Anton Hilson's hospital records. The false incident report was filed against Marlo Denvers. The totality of it, assembled and presented in plain language that left no room for interpretation. She looked up at Morgan over her glasses. "You used your badge," she said, "not to protect the public, but to harm it. Repeatedly. Deliberately. And you did so with the confidence of a man who believed he would never face this moment." She paused. "You were wrong." Morgan was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. He did not speak. He did not look up. He was led out of the courtroom by 2 marshals, and the door closed behind him with a sound that was not loud, but felt final in a way that quiet sounds sometimes do. Miller came next. He had aged visibly since his arrest. The careful, political composure that had carried him through 30 years of departmental maneuvering had collapsed somewhere between the indictment and today, and what was left looked smaller than the man who had stood outside the Stafford PD building reading from a prepared card. His attorney argued for leniency, cited his years of service, his family, his otherwise clean record. The judge listened to all of it. Then she noted that Miller had not simply bent a rule or made a mistake in judgment. He had deliberately accessed a sealed record, a legal protection that exists specifically to give people a second chance, and weaponized it against a decorated veteran in order to protect a corrupt officer and serve a political agenda. He had then used the reach of his position to intimidate a witness. Anton Hilson's daughter had gone to work afraid. That, the judge said, was not a technicality. That was the abuse of power in its clearest form. Miller was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and permanent revocation of his law enforcement certification. He closed his eyes when the sentence was read. His wife, in the front row of the gallery, pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. The courtroom was very still. Then, from somewhere in the gallery, someone began to clap. Slowly, at first. Then others joined. Not wild or celebratory. Something more serious than that. The sound of people who had waited a long time for something and were finally, carefully, allowing themselves to believe it had actually happened. Marlo did not clap. He sat with his hands folded in his lap and looked at the empty space at the front of the courtroom where both men had stood moments before. He did not feel triumph. He felt something quieter and more durable than triumph. He felt the particular weight of justice, real, documented, consequential justice, settling into the record permanently, where it could not be expunged, reassigned, fast-tracked away, or quietly forgotten. He turned to Hilson. The older man was looking straight ahead, his jaw set, his eyes bright with something he was holding carefully in place. His hand was still in Eva's. After a moment he exhaled, long and slow, and his shoulders came down by half an inch, like a man releasing a breath he had been holding for 2 years. He turned to Marlo. He didn't say anything. Neither did Marlo. They didn't need to. The city of Stafford settled the federal civil rights lawsuit. The terms were substantial. Ruby had negotiated with the focus and patience of someone who understood that the number on the settlement document was not the most important part. The most important part was the consent decree attached to it. Mandatory bias accountability training across the entire department. An independent civilian review board with actual authority, and a requirement that all future officer transfers include full disclosure of prior complaint histories. The training program had a name: the Hilson Initiative. Anton Hilson had submitted his written statement to the AG's office on a Monday morning, sitting at his kitchen table with Eva beside him and a pen in his hand that he held steady the whole way through. His daughter had taken the day off work to be there. When he finished signing, she put her hand on his shoulder and kept it there. He called Marlo afterward. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Marlo could hear it in his voice, the particular sound of a man who had put something down that he had been carrying for a very long time. The lunch with Admiral Jasmine had happened 2 weeks after the settlement. A corner table at a quiet restaurant in Washington. No uniforms, no ceremony, just 2 men and bad coffee and a window looking out onto a street where nobody knew who they were or what they had been through together. They talked for 3 hours, about Ramadi, about the men who had come home from that building, about the ones who hadn't come home from other places, about what it meant to serve something larger than yourself, and what happened when the institution you served couldn't always live up to what it asked of you, about the difference between loyalty and silence, and how those two things got confused more often than they should. When they parted on the sidewalk outside, Jasmine shook Marlo's hand and held it for a moment. "You were right not to walk away," he said. Marlo said, "So were you." Daisy appeared in the doorway of the study. Same as the beginning. Same doorway. Same daughter. But not quite the same. There was something in her posture now that had been there before in seed form, and had grown into something fuller and more certain. She leaned against the frame and looked at her father sitting at his desk with the Navy Cross open before him. "Georgetown Law accepted me," she said. "The letter came this morning." Marlo looked up. "Same morning as the Miller indictment," she added. He looked at her for a long moment. "That's not a coincidence," he said. "That's alignment." She smiled at that, came into the room, and sat in the chair across the desk. She looked at the Navy Cross, then at him. "How did you stay that calm?" she said. "At the gate, with his hand on your uniform. How did you just stand there?" He thought about it. He took his time, the way he always did with things that deserved it. "When you've stood in places where the choice was life or death," he said, "a man grabbing your lapel outside a ceremony is not the most frightening thing you've ever faced." He paused. "The frightening thing is walking away, because if you walk away, it happens to the next man, and the one after him, and it keeps happening until somebody decides their turn has come." He looked at the cross. "Your grandfather couldn't fight it the way I fought it," he said. "His grandfather couldn't fight it at all. Every generation, somebody has to pick up what the last one couldn't carry all the way to the end." He closed the presentation box gently. "It was just my turn." Daisy stood up and crossed the room. She put her arms around him from behind and held on. He reached up and put his hand over hers. They stayed like that for a moment, father and daughter, quiet in the evening light. Later, after Daisy had gone, Marlo went to the closet. He took the garment bag down from the hook. He unzipped it slowly and lifted the dress white jacket out with both hands. Careful, deliberate, every fold respected. He checked each crease, smoothed one lapel with 2 fingers. Then he hung it back inside, zipped the bag closed, and returned it to its place. He had worn it for the ceremony. He had worn it for the fight. He would wear it again for whatever came next. Because a man like Marlo Denvers did not retire from standing up. He simply pressed the uniform, hung it carefully, and waited for morning. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.